Dirty boy. In the UK, winter bikes are a real thing. Sounds ridiculous to say, but they are really a thing. Years and years and years ago, when I first started cycling, I always used to ride a really cheap, kind of nothing fancy bike in the winter, put on mudguards and just sort of ride around on it and not be that precious about it ultimately. The winters here in the UK can be pretty harsh on bikes. The thing about the UK winters here is they're quite often very wet and can be quite cold and snowy. The roads are regularly salted and you're continually going from freezing and thawing, so there's quite often a lot of salt and just crap on the road, to be frank. But now this year, living in the Peak District, I wanted to actually build up what I believed was like the perfect winter bike. This particular bike is a bike which has become a project bike, which I'm using for testing various different things because ultimately it's the bike I'm riding the most. Now, I used as the base of this a Argon 18 grey matter, which is Argon 18's entry-level gravel bike. It's an aluminium frame, carbon fork, and I think it starts at like £1,700, give or take, for a complete build bike. So yes, it's still quite a lot of money, but in this terms of the scale of a bike to use as a base, it's a way more cheaper start point of a bike. Argon 18's grey matter is the baby brother to the dark matter. It has the same kind of geometry as the dark matter. The fork is exactly the same as the dark matter fork. The main difference is the fact that it's an aluminium frame and the tyre clearance is slightly less. You're limited to a 40mm tyre on the rear, but you can still fit a 45mm tyre in the front because it's the same fork as the dark matter's fork. There's 10 things that I've done which I believe make up the ultimate winter bike. First of all, of course, is Mudguards. There's loads of different brands out there. There's loads of different offerings from different companies doing mudguards, fenders, whatever you want to call them. Personally, I'm a big believer in full-length mudguards and good quality, expensive premium ones. The best mudguards I've ever installed are the most expensive ones. These particular mudguards are the Portland design mudguards, fenders. They basically bolt onto the frame at the pannier mounts and on the fork mounts. I just found them incredibly easy to install. I purchased them online from Condor Bikes in London. They are a more premium product, but after using various different plastic mudguards, which just ended up rubbing and not quite staying in place where I wanted them to be, I thought I'm just gonna bite the bullet, buy these ones and try it out. And I have to say the Portland Design Works mudguards have been the best ones I've ever installed. You do have to remember, if you are installing mudguards on a bike, it will limit the tyre size. So with the grey matter, instead of fitting 40mm tyres on it, I now have 35mm tyres on it, so slightly smaller. Number two, the big one for me was having Dynamo lights on the bike. The reason why I like Dynamo lights is because I just can forget about them. They turn on when you start riding, they turn off when you stop riding, but they're on. It's great. The lights I've got on the grey matter are from Exposure. The front light is basically just mounted underneath the stem and the rear light is mounted like you would traditionally on the seat post of a bike. How this system works is the dynamo is on the hub of the front wheel and a cable runs up the right-hand side of the fork, which then plugs into the front light, and then from the back of the front light, you plug the rear light into it as well. There you go, you've got lights on all the time. Sometimes I will ride with an additional rear light, especially if it's a bit darker and I want something that flashes, because the Exposure rear light for the Dynamo setup is a solid red light. And sometimes when it's a bit cloudy or a bit misty or something, it's quite nice to have a flashing light at the same time. Number three, I would recommend riding a bomb-proof set of wheels. What I mean by that is generally something with a high spoke count. A carbon rim is still fine to use, but something that's tough and strong. Maybe a gravel specific wheel is a good shout to look at. These kind of wheels basically will be a bit more bomb-proof and a bit tougher, a bit more burly to deal with any like potholes or just rough stuff that you may go onto. The grey matter is still a gravel bike and I still have set it up so I can use it off-road on some gravel, but I do think that running a more sturdy wheel set will really help with that. The wheels that I put on this bike are a set of Enve AG25 wheels, which is a 700C wheel. They're built up with a Son Dynamo hub on the front and a Chris King rear hub. It's an incredibly bougie set of wheels and probably overkill for what you really do need, but I'm very lucky to get to work with some awesome brands and be able to build up a set of wheels like this. We've used the AG25s as the base wheel because they have a pretty high spoke count, they're wide internal rim as a gravel rim, and it means that I can still use them as gravel wheels anyway outside of this build itself. They're very nice. Number four, tough tyres. That sounds an obvious thing to say, but what I mean by tough tyres are ones that are maybe don't have as high rolling resistance, so they're a bit slower and maybe a bit heavier, but they should have more puncture resistance to them. Who wants to spend time sitting at the side of the road repairing a puncture in the pissing rain or in the snow or in the cold? I don't want to be doing that. And often in the winter, I'm riding on a bike which is generally heavier and it's not going to be as fast. It's not about getting PRs and stuff. It's about training productively more than anything. So a slightly slower tyre really isn't a bad thing. I've got a set of Schwalbe G1 all-rounds installed in a 35mm. So this is their light gravel tyre, I would probably word it as. It's got a bit of a gravel tread on it, so it's absolutely fine to use off-road still, but it also rides fantastic on the road. So it's quite a versatile tyre, allowing you to kind of go on-road, off-road, or whatever takes your fancy. But it also has very good puncture protection. So it alleviates, hopefully, touch wood, hopefully it alleviates some of those concerns of getting punctures stuck in the middle of the Peak District with sideways rain, which I'm not here for that. Number 5. Now, again, this is probably excessive to a lot of people, but for me personally is quite important. A couple of years ago, I broke both of my wrists and I have subsequently had a lot of issues with grip. It also relates to shifting with mechanical group sets. The motion for shifting on a mechanical group set caused me quite a lot of pain in my wrists. I happen to have, very luckily and conveniently, a GRX Di2 group set in a box that was already used. It was on a previous bike to be able to put onto the grey matter. A SRAM group set equally would be fantastic. The benefits of having an electronic group set is that the shifting is always indexed, it's always crisp. Once it's set up, it's going to be pretty much perfect all the time. You're not going to have to worry about cable stretching or anything like that. And for me personally, the ability to just tap a button, especially with big thick gloves on, is really, really nice. With the Shimano group sets as well, you do have additional buttons on the hoods which you can customize for changing your screen on your bike computer, turning on and off your lights, being able to shift up and down on the rear mech or the front mech, whatever you prefer. So there's lots of abilities to customize the shifting and accessories that are connected to it, which might help to improve your overall experience in riding. I will admit that running an electronic group set is maybe overkill for some people, but there are now electronic group set price points are becoming way more reasonable. You can look at something like Shimano 105 Di2, Shimano GRX Di2, the 11-speed group sets now, you can actually get quite good prices on those. So you could also look at SRAM Apex as well. The XPLR range could offer an option for you as well. Could be a good shout to look at a 1x group set as well for the bike. I purely wanted to have the wider gear ranges because where I live it's very hilly, so that's why I've set it up 2x. Number 6, luggage. Tailfin luggage all over the bike. Some there, some there. For me, having a top tube bag and a frame bag on the bike is incredibly useful because I use the frame bag to carry additional layers like a rain jacket, a spare set of gloves, just things to keep you warm, really, warm and dry. The top tube bag basically gets full of food because quite often if you've got loads of layers on, it's really hard to get to the jersey pockets. So having it in the top tube bag means it's just easy to access and easy to get to. For me, having bags on the bike, especially for winter riding, is incredibly useful to be able to keep yourself warm and keep yourself nutritionally fed on Haribo. Now, number 7, I've already sort of touched on this as well, and I built up my winter bike as an aluminium frame bike, which kind of also ties into number 8, which is carbon forks. The reason why I've used an aluminium frame is ultimately it's just cheaper. I'm less precious about it. It's something that's not so expensive, so I don't have to be so concerned about it getting scuffed up or bashed around or anything. The bonus of having the carbon forks, which is, as I say, is number 8 on my list of 10, they really do help in the sense of comfort. They bring a lot more comfort into the frame. Aluminium forks are pretty harsh to ride actually, and a carbon fork does take a lot of that road vibration away. Aluminium frame, carbon forks for me is the perfect base of a frame to use as a winter bike. Number 9, I've made my winter bike less aggressive. I don't need it to be aggressive. It's a bike which I'm riding around in the winter where I'm quite happy to be sitting more upright. What I mean by I've made it less aggressive is I'm riding a slightly shorter stem and I'm riding the front end slightly higher up. There is more spaces underneath the stem and the stem is 10mm shorter. I don't have to do that, but it's quite nice to do it, to be honest with you. I do notice the difference going from this bike to a more racy bike, but it only takes me maybe half an hour or so and then I'm used to the bike again. To me, it just made sense for it not to be as aggressive. It didn't need to be, so it's fine. Number 10, the last point for me for my ultimate winter bike, which is controversial, and I believe there's going to be loads of people that tell me I'm an idiot for doing it, but I don't care. Waxing the chain. Now, if you properly wax the chain and clean everything, wax chains, from my experience, seem to last very well in the winter. You do have to understand there's an element of maintenance required with that. Having the chain waxed initially with a melted wax system is a really great start point to it. But the reason why I like it is ultimately it doesn't seem to attract tons and tons of dirt. Of course, you do still need to maintain the system, but it just generally seems to be cleaner than an oil-based system from my experiences. My opinion is having a wax chain is a good thing in the winter. My last thing to add on to this is, in the winter, it is harder riding. It's harder on your components, it's harder on your body. It's generally a bit crap because the conditions outside just aren't great. If the conditions really are that bad, and you can, why not just ride on a turbo trainer? That's my opinion anyway. I have a few bonus things involving winter cycling, which I thought I'd also share with you. For me, essentials, multiple pairs of gloves. Lazer do these quite thick, deep winter gloves, which I do always seem to end up using in the winter, but they also do a very nice thin, I don't even know how you describe them, thinner long finger gloves. So quite often I will just shove these thin gloves in the frame bag because I can always put them on underneath these big thick gloves, and it just, if I get really cold hands, it just protects my hands a little bit more. Schwalbe also do something which is called the 1365, which is basically a more puncture protection, bit more sturdier version of the 1 and the Pro 1 tire. So very, very good like commuter tire or winter tire. I don't know if you can catch it, but it actually has like a reflective strip on it as well, which means that it just adds that extra bit of visibility. So that could be a good option for a winter tire if you don't necessarily want a gravel tire on your bike. For me in the winter, layering is definitely the king of keeping warm and being able to ride outside more. I generally will always have a rain jacket in the frame bag, but things like this from Lazer, which is like a insulated jersey jackety thing, using some of the fabrics from Pertex, who make some of the best performing technical fabrics out there, will just help to keep you a bit warmer as well. So definitely check out things like that as well. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this was quite a useful insight into what has become the bike that I ride more than any other bike at the moment in the winter of the UK, which is 9 months of the year. If you have any comments, drop them in the thing below. See you later. Bye.